The air in the dining room felt thick, almost heavy, as the family gathered. It was the first night of Hanukkah, and the glow of anticipation usually filled the space, but tonight something felt off. Everyone was seated, eyes on the unlit menorah, a beautiful silver piece passed down through generations. Uncle Mordecai, usually the last to arrive, was already there, leaning back in his chair with a smirk that felt out of place. He watched as my mother gently placed the first candle in its holder, her movements slow and reverent. Just as she reached for the matchbox, Uncle Mordecai cleared his throat loudly. "Honestly," he began, his voice cutting through the quiet, "all this fuss for a silly old story is just a myth, nothing more." Before anyone could react, he leaned forward, a puff of air escaping his lips, and extinguished the single candle my mother had just positioned. The small, unlit wick seemed to mock us. A wave of uncomfortable silence washed over the room. It wasn't just a dismissive act. It was a public show, a challenge to everything we held dear. His arrogance was palpable, a direct affront to tradition. Then, to everyone's disbelief, he reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a sleek, modern LED candle, a small, battery-operated stick of plastic and light. It glowed with a cold, artificial white. "Much more efficient, wouldn't you say?" he announced, placing it haphazardly on the table, not even near the menorah. No messy wax, no fire hazard. Progress, my dears, progress. His words hung in the air, revealing a profound disrespect, a deep disdain for our family traditions and the sacred meaning of the holiday. It felt like a punch to the gut for all of us, especially my mother, who simply stood there, her hand still hovering over the matchbox. I don't know what came over me. Usually I'm the quiet one, observing, listening. But something about that artificial light, that casual dismissal of centuries of meaning, snapped inside me. Without a word, I rose from my seat. My movements felt calm, deliberate. I walked over to the table, picked up the LED candle Uncle Mordecai had just placed, and with a soft click, I turned it off. The room plunged back into the soft gloom of twilight filtering through the window. I then placed the now dark LED candle back into his outstretched hand. Our eyes met. His held a flicker of surprise, then something unreadable. Mine, I hoped, conveyed a silent message. I turned back to the menorah. My mother, still frozen, looked at me with wide eyes. I picked up the matchbox she had left on the table. With a steady hand, I struck a match, the sulfur scent briefly filling the air. Then, slowly, deliberately, I lit the single traditional beeswax candle my mother had placed. Its flame, small and fragile, flickered defiantly, casting dancing shadows on the walls. A hush fell over the room once more, deeper this time. The air thickened with unspoken tension, a palpable weight. The warm, yellow glow of the beeswax candle seemed to consume the memory of the modern cold light. It was a tiny flame, but it held so much more. A brief, poignant thought arose in my mind. Some truths cannot be extinguished by convenience. I watched the single flame, a quiet determination hardening my gaze. This story, I knew, was clearly far from over. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us where you are watching from in the comments. My childhood was steeped in the rich tapestry of our small Jewish community, nestled in a valley that time seemed to have forgotten. It wasn't a place of grand cities or hurried lives, but of cobbled streets and houses that had stood for generations, each brick holding stories of families and traditions. The air always carried the scent of baking challah on Fridays, or the sweet, earthy smell of spices from the market. Life here moved to the rhythm of the Jewish calendar, each holiday a vibrant thread, woven into our daily existence. Hanukkah, especially, was a time of pure magic. The town square would glow with menorahs in every window, their flames dancing against the winter chill. Our synagogue, a sturdy stone building with stained glass windows depicting ancient stories, was the heart of it all. Everyone knew everyone, and family gatherings weren't just about food. They were about sharing stories, old legends, and the wisdom passed down through generations. The elders, with their twinkling eyes and soft voices, would recount tales of perseverance and miracles, making the symbolism of light and endurance feel real, tangible. I remember sitting on my grandfather's lap, mesmerized by his words, the warmth of his hand on my head. These weren't just stories, they were lessons, a blueprint for living. I was always the thoughtful one, a bit quieter than my cousins, but deeply observant. I loved poring over ancient texts, finding comfort and wonder in the layers of meaning hidden within each word. My dream wasn't to leave our valley for the big city, but to stay, to learn, and to ensure that these traditions, this deep well of meaning, didn't dry up. I wanted to be one of those elders, passing on the stories, explaining the deeper significance of our holidays, especially to the children. I felt a responsibility, a quiet calling, to preserve this heritage for future generations. Not just the rituals, but the very spirit behind them. Uncle Mordecai, though, was a different kind of man. He was my mother's older brother, a figure of significant influence in our community, initially respected for his worldly success. He had left our valley years ago, made a fortune in some distant city, and then returned, bringing with him a certain air of modern efficiency and a condescending smile. When he first came back, his interactions with me were superficially cordial. He'd pat my head, ask about my studies, and occasionally offer some vague advice about getting ahead in the real world. But even then, I could sense a growing divergence in our values. He spoke of progress and profit, while I spoke of legacy and learning. I remember once, during a Sukkot celebration, I was excitedly telling him about a passage from the Talmud, explaining how it taught us about humility and the transient nature of life. He listened, nodding politely, but then cut me off to talk about a new stock market venture he was funding. He said, "That's all well and good, kid, but what's the return on investment?" His words, though seemingly harmless, chipped away at the beautiful meaning I was trying to convey. It left me with a quiet anxiety, a gnawing worry about the erosion of tradition in the face of what he called modernity. Mordecai's dismissals, at first subtle, grew more vocal, more pointed, especially towards anything he deemed outdated or inefficient. It was a slow drip, a steady pressure, building the underlying tension that eventually led to that Hanukkah night, the night he extinguished the candle. These subtle jabs from Uncle Mordecai became more frequent, like tiny cracks appearing in a once solid wall. They weren't always direct attacks, but rather dismissive comments, veiled criticisms that slowly chipped away at the family's harmony and my own faith in his character. I remember one year, the community was trying to raise funds to restore the old community library, a place filled with centuries-old texts that were slowly decaying. Mordecai, being the wealthiest member of the family, promised a substantial donation, a sum that would have covered most of the repairs. Everyone was so relieved, so grateful. But then, a week before the deadline, he pulled out, citing unforeseen market fluctuations. He casually added that superstitious spending on dusty old books wasn't a wise investment. The word stung, not just for the lost funds, but for the way he reduced something so precious to us to mere superstition. It felt like a betrayal, a broken promise wrapped in a dismissive sneer. Another time, I was preparing a presentation for the local historical society about the intricate history of our town's Jewish quarter, a project I'd poured months of research into. I was so excited to share the stories, the lives of the people who built our community. I mentioned it to him during a family dinner, hoping for some encouragement. Instead, he laughed, a loud, booming sound that made everyone else at the table uncomfortable. He called my passion for ancient texts quaint hobbies, suggesting I should spend my time on something more practical, like real estate or finance. He even offered to help me get a proper job if I ever got tired of my little history club. It wasn't just belittling, it was a public humiliation, a way to make me feel small and my life's work insignificant. He also had a way of subtly undermining family unity. My aunt, his sister, was a talented artist who painted beautiful scenes of Jewish life. Mordecai often praised her work in front of her, but then, later, to other relatives, he would quietly remark on how unprofitable her art was, suggesting she should have pursued a more stable career. These comments, whispered here and there, created a quiet discord, making some relatives question their own pursuits if they didn't align with Mordecai's definition of success. He wasn't overtly malicious, it was more insidious than that, a constant low hum of negativity that slowly eroded trust and shared purpose. He twisted narratives to benefit his own image, always positioning himself as the pragmatic, successful one, while subtly diminishing anyone who valued things beyond monetary gain. In our community, respect for elders and tradition was paramount. Mordecai, as the eldest and wealthiest, leveraged this. His actions, therefore, were particularly jarring and hurtful. He knew the cultural weight of his words, and he used it to his advantage, making his dismissals even more painful. It wasn't just a difference of opinion. It was a fundamental clash of worldviews, where his modern, profit-driven outlook was constantly at odds with our deeply rooted heritage. Each incident, each snide remark, each broken promise added another layer to the growing chasm between us. The Hanukkah incident, extinguishing the candle, wasn't an isolated act of defiance. It was the culmination of years of emotional neglect, disrespect, and a fundamental disagreement on what truly mattered. It was his final, public statement that he had no regard for the values we held sacred. A moment that made it clear that the quiet anxieties I had felt for so long were now a stark, undeniable reality. The emotional atmosphere within the family and the wider community became increasingly tense. It was like a slow-burning fuse, getting closer and closer to an explosion. Uncle Mordecai's public dismissals of our traditions, which had started as subtle jabs, grew more frequent and much sharper. He wasn't just questioning things anymore. He was actively tearing them down, often with a smirk that dared anyone to challenge him. Family meals, once a cherished time for sharing stories and laughter, turned into uncomfortable debates. Mordecai often dominated the conversations, his voice booming over anyone else's. He had a way of twisting words, making anyone who expressed a traditional view sound foolish or outdated. He'd scoff at the idea of keeping kosher, calling it an ancient dietary restriction with no scientific basis. He'd laugh at the idea of Shabbat, saying, "Who needs a day of rest when you can be making money?" It wasn't just his opinions, it was the way he delivered them, designed to belittle and silence. You could feel the air thicken with unspoken frustrations, but few dared to speak up, fearing his sharp tongue or the subtle ways he could make life difficult. The narrator, me, felt the immense weight of unspoken expectations and judgments. Neighbors and even some relatives, perhaps swayed by Mordecai's outward success, would sometimes echo his sentiments, or at least stay silent when he spoke. This silence, this quiet agreement, felt almost as bad as his direct insults. It made me feel isolated, like I was holding on to something precious that everyone else was ready to let go of. Others, though, would offer a sympathetic glance, a quiet nod, or a whispered word of encouragement after Mordecai had left the room. These small gestures were vital, little lifelines in a sea of his growing influence. Mordecai became even more overt in his disregard for religious practices and cultural heritage. During holiday preparations, he would often make sarcastic remarks. At Passover, he'd loudly question the point of searching for chametz, calling it a silly scavenger hunt for dust bunnies. For Sukkot, he'd refuse to sit in the sukkah, claiming it was too cold or too inconvenient, preferring the comfort of the heated dining room while making jokes about living like a nomad. These were not just personal choices, they were public statements, designed to undermine the very fabric of our shared life. He seemed to enjoy the discomfort he caused, thriving on being the contrarian, the modern man among what he considered a group of old-fashioned traditionalists. This period was the peak of my emotional distress. I felt trapped between my deeply held beliefs and the relentless pressure from Uncle Mordecai. Every gathering, every community event felt like walking on eggshells. I constantly worried about what he would say next, how he would try to diminish our heritage. It was like a constant hum of anxiety in the background of my life. I wanted to stand up for what I believed in, to defend our traditions, but I didn't know how to do it without causing a huge rift in the family. The thought of confronting him directly was terrifying. He was so powerful, so convincing in his own twisted logic. I felt suffocated by his presence, by his words, by the way he seemed to drain the joy out of everything we held sacred. I knew something had to give, but I had no idea what that would be, or how I would find the strength to face him. The Hanukkah incident was just around the corner, waiting to ignite the powder keg of years of accumulated tension. Then came the turning point, the moment everything shifted. It wasn't a family dinner or a holiday. It happened during a community meeting, one that was supposed to be about preserving our historic synagogue. Everyone gathered, the air thick with hope and a shared sense of purpose. We all knew the old synagogue, with its beautiful stained glass and worn wooden benches, was more than just a building. It was a piece of our history, a connection to generations past. We were there to discuss fundraising, renovations, how to keep it alive. Uncle Mordecai, of course, was there. He walked in late, as usual, taking a seat at the back, a smirk already playing on his lips. I braced myself for another one of his cutting remarks, another dismissal of our efforts. But what he said next was something I never expected. He stood up, cleared his throat, and in a voice that carried authority, announced that he had a much more practical solution for the synagogue. My stomach dropped. He then revealed his plan. He had been secretly negotiating with the developer. His proposal was to sell the land the synagogue stood on. He wanted to tear it down and build a modern commercial complex, something useful and profitable. He talked about outdated sentimentality and moving forward. A stunned silence fell over the room. People exchanged shocked glances. You could hear a pin drop. It was a punch to the gut, a betrayal of everything we held dear. This wasn't just about a building. It was about our identity, our roots. This blatant disregard for our shared heritage pushed me to my absolute breaking point. All those years of quiet anxiety, of feeling suffocated by his dismissals, converged into a single, burning resolve. I knew right then that I couldn't stay silent anymore. I stood up, my legs feeling a little wobbly, but my voice, surprisingly, was steady. I didn't yell. I didn't get angry. Instead, I pulled out a carefully prepared presentation. I had spent countless hours researching, not just the synagogue's history, but the deeper meaning behind our traditions, especially the mystery of the number 8 in Jewish belief. I spoke about the synagogue's role as a center of learning, a place where generations had found solace and community. I talked about the historical documents stored there, the stories etched into its walls. And then I explained the profound significance of the number 8. I linked it to Hanukkah, to new beginnings, to miracles that extend beyond the natural order, to the oil that lasted 8 days. I showed how this number wasn't just a random count, but a symbol of perseverance, of hope, of the enduring spirit that had allowed our people to survive and thrive through impossible odds. I argued that tearing down the synagogue wasn't just losing a building, it was severing a vital connection to that enduring spirit, to the very essence of who we are. Mordecai, of course, was enraged. He interrupted me, his face red, trying to belittle my knowledge. He called my presentation childish beliefs and fairy tales. He mocked my passion, saying I was living in the past, clinging to superstitions. He tried to dismiss everything I said as irrelevant, as emotional nonsense. He even suggested I was trying to manipulate people with old wives' tales. But then, something unexpected happened. An elder in our community, Mrs. Goldstein, a woman everyone respected, who had always remained neutral in family squabbles, slowly rose from her seat. She was quiet, dignified. She looked at me, then at Mordecai, and then back at the gathered community. She spoke softly, but her voice carried weight. She validated everything I had said. She spoke about her own childhood memories in that synagogue, about the lessons she learned there, about the meaning of the number 8 as she understood it from her grandparents. She talked about how the synagogue was a living testament to our history, a place where the mystery of the number 8 continued to unfold through acts of community and faith. She spoke about the real value of heritage, not in monetary terms, but in spiritual and cultural richness. Her words exposed the truth of Mordecai's materialistic motives, showing his plan for what it was, a move driven by greed, not community well-being. This moment broke the cycle of suffering, shifting the narrative in a way I never thought possible. The public confrontation left me in a strange mix of emotions. Relief washed over me, a feeling of finally having spoken my truth after so long. But then came the fear, a cold knot in my stomach. What had I just done? Had I truly broken my family apart? Doubt crept in, whispering that perhaps I had gone too far, that Mordecai was right, and I was just clinging to outdated ideas. Yet, underneath it all, a surge of empowered defiance pulsed through me. Standing up to him, especially with Mrs. Goldstein's unexpected backing, felt incredibly liberating. It was emotionally draining, yes, like running a marathon, but also deeply satisfying. Like a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying had finally been lifted. The aftermath was immediate and complex. Some of my family members, who had always seemed to walk on eggshells around Uncle Mordecai, now came forward with open support. My cousin Sarah, who usually kept to herself, hugged me tightly, her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered, "for saying what we all felt, but were too afraid to say." My aunt, usually so timid, sent me a message saying she was proud. Their support, hesitant at first, grew stronger as they saw the community's reaction. They were touched by my courage and, more importantly, by Mrs. Goldstein's validation. Her words had given them permission, in a way, to acknowledge their own feelings about Mordecai's behavior and the importance of our heritage. But not everyone reacted that way. Others, still very much under Mordecai's influence, or perhaps just fearing his notorious backlash, distanced themselves. My Uncle David, Mordecai's younger brother, avoided my gaze at subsequent family gatherings. He made excuses to leave early, never quite meeting my eyes. Some of our more conservative relatives, who valued keeping the peace above all else, seemed to view me as a disruptor, someone who had stirred up unnecessary trouble. The family dinner table, once a place of lively chatter, now often felt heavy with unspoken tension, divided by invisible lines. The community itself became a microcosm of the larger tension between tradition and modernity. Public opinion was sharply divided. Some people praised my stand, seeing it as a brave defense of our shared history. They came up to me in the synagogue, in the market, expressing their gratitude and offering their help. They saw Mordecai's actions as a purely materialistic grab, a betrayal of sacred trust. Others, however, felt that Mordecai, despite his flaws, was a successful businessman who brought prosperity to the town. They argued that progress was inevitable, that sometimes old things had to make way for new. They saw me as an obstacle to economic development, someone holding on to the past for sentimental reasons. The local newspaper even ran a few opinion pieces, some supporting the preservation of the synagogue, others advocating for Mordecai's development plans. It felt like everyone had an opinion, and the air was thick with debate. During this time, I faced moments of profound self-doubt. Lying awake at night, I would replay the confrontation, second-guessing every word I said. Had I chosen the right words? Was I eloquent enough? The fear that I might have irrevocably damaged family ties, that I might have alienated people I loved, gnawed at me. My stomach would tighten, and sleep became elusive. I questioned whether my actions were truly for the greater good, or if I was just being stubborn, even selfish. But then I would remember Mrs. Goldstein's calm, dignified words, her validation of the mystery of the number 8 and its significance. I would recall the faces of those who had thanked me, their genuine relief and hope. These memories, these small acts of support, helped me find strength in my conviction. My belief in the enduring power of our traditions and the newfound support from unexpected corners slowly but surely outweighed the anxiety, allowing me to stand firm in the face of the ongoing turmoil. The path forward was clear, though daunting. I knew I couldn't just stand by. Action was needed. I began the arduous process of rebuilding, not just for myself, but for the community that had, in its own way, begun to rally around the idea of preserving our heritage. My first step was to formalize our efforts. I organized meetings, initially small gatherings in my home, then larger ones at the community center, to discuss strategies for saving the synagogue. I used the historical context of the mystery of the number 8, explaining its profound significance, not just as a religious concept, but as a symbol of perseverance and the enduring spirit of our people. I spoke of the Maccabees, of the small cruse of oil, and how that miracle was a testament to faith and resilience. It wasn't just about a building, it was about our identity. Slowly but steadily, a movement began to form. We created petitions, gathered historical documents, and even started a fundraising campaign. People who had been on the fence, swayed by Mordecai's promises of modern development, began to see the deeper value in what we were fighting for. The narrative shifted from one of outdated sentimentality to one of cultural preservation and community identity. Uncle Mordecai, meanwhile, faced a different kind of reckoning. The public censure was swift and decisive. His development plan, once seen as a boon, was now viewed as a cynical attempt to profit from our sacred spaces. The town council, swayed by the overwhelming community support for the synagogue's preservation and the strong historical arguments we presented, rejected his proposal outright. It was a humiliating blow to his influence. The very community he had sought to dominate and reshape now largely ostracized him. He found himself increasingly isolated, his phone calls unanswered, his invitations to social events ignored. The power he once wielded, built on financial success and a dismissive attitude towards tradition, crumbled under the weight of collective disapproval. He was left to confront the stark consequence of his disrespect and materialism. a man alone amidst the community he had tried to erase. The synagogue was saved. It wasn't just saved, it was restored with meticulous care, every arch and stained glass window gleaming with renewed purpose. It didn't just become a place of worship, it transformed into a vibrant center for cultural and religious education. We started workshops on Jewish history, Hebrew language classes, and even cooking lessons for traditional holiday foods. My dream, once a quiet aspiration, had found its fulfillment. The community, though changed by the upheavals, found a renewed sense of unity and purpose. We learned that progress didn't mean abandoning our past, but rather integrating it, embracing a balance between tradition and the necessary evolution of modern life. The old ways were not shackles. They were roots that gave us strength and direction. Looking back, the journey was long and fraught with challenges, but the outcome was profoundly meaningful. The mystery of the number 8, representing perseverance, miracles, and the enduring spirit of tradition, was not just a historical fact I had learned in ancient texts. It became a living principle that guided our fight. It was the quiet strength that allowed me to stand up to Mordecai, the stubborn flame that refused to be extinguished. It was the resilience of our ancestors, echoing through generations, that ultimately brought light back into our lives and our community. Our story became a testament to the idea that some truths, some values, are indeed eternal, and their light, however small, can overcome the deepest shadows. It was a triumph of enduring values, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, faith and community can always find a way to shine.